Welcome back to the Grand Solar Minimum channel. Today is Monday, June 14th, 2021. Hope everyone had a weekend and a good start to your work week for most of you out there. Let's take a look at some space weather news and then we'll get right into it tonight. I have a couple things to talk about. First of all, solar wind speeds are coming in at a low 331 even kilometers per second with a density of about 20. Now that's pretty thick. And that is the density flow plasma that is entering our atmosphere. So right now particles are kind of thick, so we should see, just depending on how long this lasts, we should see an increase in the cosmic radiation dosage rates this time tomorrow when we do the next report. But for right now, we are looking at cosmic radiation dosage rates at 9.2%. That is a 2% drop in the last 48 hours. So again, we'll see how long this lasts as far as density being this thick. 20 is pretty thick for low solar wind. It's a good thing that we don't have high solar winds with this kind of density. We'd be talking about a pretty fluxed atmosphere for sure. Two sunspots to report on. If you look to the left and the right of your screen, and we'll go over it again and when we get to the grandsolarminimum.com on the space weather section. But AR 2833 and AR 2832. Now, AR 2824 is returning after 2 weeks to the far side of the sun per tradition and is being renumbered as AR 2833. So the sunspot that is in the northeastern department of our star, that is the one that we are is actually a reoccurring sunspot, and looks still pretty good and intact. There are some bright active regions in the southern hemisphere of the sun. Those are not being numbered as sunspots at this time, so we are dealing with a sunspot number of 22, by the way. And we've had some steady solar activity, but yet still weak. When you divide the two active regions here by 2, obviously, we are talking about an average sunspot number count of 11. Now, these are the kind of size sunspots that we see during a minimum or a time of declining solar activity. Now, since we are coming out of a minimum and we are still witnessing minimum conditions, all right? When you have solar wind this low, 331 even kilometers per second, density as thick as it is, cosmic radiation dosage rates are near where they were during the bottom of this minimum, nonetheless still high, 9.2%. KP indices are low at a 1 with a 24-hour max of a 1. The thermosphere, that's the very upper part of our atmosphere, is dropping in temperature when it was on the uptick for a while. Well, we are still witnessing low solar activity. Yes, we are identifying more active regions, sunspots in here, but I kind of talked about this about a week or so ago about how I predict that we will always see. It's going to be rare to get any more blank days without sunspots, because I think the way these sunspots are staggered, once one leaves, another one pops up, we'll always be in a position to see a sunspot continuing each day at some kind of nature, whether it's a reoccurring sunspot or whether it is a newly formed sunspot. Either way, we are going to see well, we should anyway see more action from our star, as this cycle will eventually begin to uptick. And you're saying, well, what about now? Isn't it upticking now? Well, I mean, yeah, we're seeing more sunspots, but they're small. They're still the size of what they were during the minimum. So we're just seeing more frequency. We're not seeing large sunspots just yet. Again, this takes time. It took I remember we started covering this back in 2016, and each year we saw lower and lower solar activity. So it didn't just drop to minimum conditions overnight. It took time. Just like we know that it will take time for it to get to its maximum, somewhere around 2025. Still another 4 years away. This is all going to tie in as well to my report tonight on the Terminator event. And no, it is not Arnold Schwarzenegger related. And I have to talk about this tonight, folks. It's old news. We've seen it already, but there's a couple of things that I wanted to go over. First, let's check out the grandsolarminimum.com. That is our website, our space weather section, and take a look at some additional stats. Right now, still on the weaker side of the sun's magnetic connection, but we are drifting in orbit to where we will be on the side where the majority of the planets are, and we all know what that is. Basically, stronger magnetic connection from the sun to planets when all of the magnetic strength has to be focused on one particular area, versus the opposite side where there's hardly any planets on that side of the solar system plane. Therefore, it is a weaker connection to those two planets. So that's the good news. The good news is that we are going to see somewhat of a stronger magnetosphere. You know, considering we're in a minimum, it still doesn't mean that we're out of it. It doesn't take us out of the minimum, but it will help when it comes to these large solar flares. It could be possible. All right, looking at our stats, the sun has been quiet, folks. Even though we have sunspots and they're crackling with B-class flares. That's it. Very, very, very quiet. A large coronal hole that is going to give us some geomagnetic unrest here for the next couple of days here. But other than that, we're not really expecting a whole lot when it comes to solar activity. Now, we do have this sunspot that is reemerging that will be labeled, I think, as 2833. This is up here. That is the one sunspot they were talking about reemerging. It was AR 2824. It is now just beyond the eastern limb. We'll see how big that one is once it turns towards Earth facing. This one is leaving us. This one is currently the numbered sunspot in the northeastern limb, turning towards Earth facing, and this will be the new area. But if you look in the southern hemisphere of the sun, not much going on here, not much going on here. So outgoing and incoming in the southern hemisphere is pretty quiet. Is it possible? Could it be that we could see a blank day in the near future? Maybe. And I say maybe because of how quiet things are right now on the sun. And this is something that I've just noticed on my personal observations. But since solar cycle 25 has begun, I've noticed that we get a lull in activity, and then a little brief uptick, and then another lull, and then another brief uptick, and then another lull. Now, since I've observed this, I've noticed that the periods of the lulls, where there's no activity, where it's almost back to minimum conditions, those periods are getting shorter, and that's how I know that we're starting to see the uptick of solar cycle 25. So we're still getting G1 geomagnetic storms frequently, but they're G1s. Those are weak. We're still seeing solar minimum conditions from solar wind and density readings. We are still seeing solar minimum readings for cosmic radiation dosage rates. We are seeing solar minimum quiet right now. Look at the KP indice since June 13th. Not even a flutter. Now that's going to change tomorrow. We do expect some solar wind that is on the way. But it's been quiet. And this solar wind that's on the way is going to be between the 15th and the 16th. Minor geomagnetic unrest is possible. Minor. This is the coronal hole that we are looking at, as far as this is the coronal hole that delivered the solar wind speeds. So I can see why they are actually predicting just a minor uptick in geomagnetic rest. Not very wide coronal holes, very scattered, not together. Now, if Earth was in the way of one of these, this particular where I'm pointing at right now would be closer to a G2. And if this was in the scale where Earth would be somewhere right here where my tip is. Right there where the tip. That's where Earth would be. So but let's just pretend that Earth was inside this gigantic. Now you're talking like a KP of 4, KP of 5, definitely higher as well. G3, G4 storms would be possible with a coronal hole this big and this deep. But that's all the way down here. We ain't got to worry about that. And that's my point. We're not seeing anything that is saying, wow, the sun is really jump-started. It is really just, to me, showing signs of strength. And that's just not it yet. Now, that doesn't mean that solar cycle 25 will be weak or will not be weak. And they're like, wow, Jake, you're being really cryptic. Well, here's why. And let's get right into it, shall we? The Terminator event. The Terminator event, this is kind of old news a little bit. This came out first on the 10th of June. And there was a study done by Scott McIntosh, a solar physicist at the National Center for Atmospheric Research. And it's very close to happening again. Now, what is a termination event? It sounds scary, right? The picture here, looks like we've got some serious solar activity on the way that could cause problems on Earth. But the Terminator event really is not anything to do with physical destruction of the planet. Let's zoom in here on this graph just to give you an idea. What we have here, these red and blue lines, and they change polarity as you can see. It goes red to blue as it intercepts here in the middle. So when they meet in the middle, if it was red, it changes to blue the next time through. But every time that the red and the blue lines meet, that is considered the Terminator event. Now, what is the Terminator event? And it reads on here that if you've never heard of the termination event, you're not alone. Many researchers have never heard of it either. It's relatively a new idea in solar physics, championed by McIntosh and colleague Bob Lehman of the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. Now, I've heard of Terminator events, and I do believe I've heard Dr. Valentina Zarkova speak of this. And it is also worthy to note that Scott McIntosh was a student to Valentina Zarkova. So his work to me is interesting and raises eyebrows and question marks, but at the same time, it feels like, because this is the second time I've seen this guy's name show up, and I feel like he likes to be the maverick. He knows that his theory right now is the Lone Ranger. And that's okay. He's all right with that. We'll just have to wait and see. Well, duh. That's pretty much what we've all been saying. But anyway, according to these two scientists, the vast bands of magnetism are drifting across the surface of the sun. When oppositely charged bands collide at the equator, and they annihilate or terminate. There's no explosion. This is magnetism, not antimatter. Nevertheless, the termination event is a big deal. It can kickstart the next solar cycle. Now, how does that happen, you say? How does that happen? Two things. It is worth noting that the last termination event we had was 10 years ago this past April. So we are now in that phase where if we are going to see this so-called termination event here soon, that would indicate that this solar cycle would get kickstarted into high gear. And it's also worth noting these termination events that are closer to 10 years, they tend to be the strongest solar cycles on records following the termination event. So if we get a termination event between now and say next April, this could be a strong solar cycle 25. The further away from that 10-year separation, the less chance of solar cycle being stronger. And they base it on 10 years being a strong cycle, and if it's an interval of 15 years, then it is going to be a really weak cycle. In fact, the one they used for an example in this article is that solar cycle 5, I believe, when they had a smooth sunspot of 82. That's pretty low. We had, I think, 121 for solar cycle 24. Prediction is we're going to be at about 115 for most scientists. A few of you out there have us somewhere around 91 to 107. And then there are a few rogue scientists who believe we could see 134 to 150. This is the sunspot count number for the maximum of solar cycle 25. But for the most part, a lot of scientists are agreeing that solar cycle 25 does appear to be weak. Now, how can we be so sure? We can't. We really can't. There is no clock out there. There's no answer for all. But I can say this. We have watched this before. Right here in solar cycle 10, where if you're following solar activity and it's dropping, we would expect to see maybe activity inching back upwards again and then dropping again at this point. But it's not. Sometimes the cycles do funny things. We had a drop and then an increase in solar activity in solar cycle 11 and then a big drop in 12 and 13. Another minimum period. Prolonged, I should say. Now, nothing crazy because we're still getting close to 200. That's about average. This is where your average sunspot peak is, between 180 and 220. You can see we had above average sunspot peaks. And that's starting to go back up here, somewhere around solar cycle 19. And now we saw a huge drop, a slight uptick into the 2000s. And since the 2000s, we are heading down. Solar cycle 25, folks, more than likely, according to the data that I've looked at and studied, where the tip of my arrow is, I wouldn't be shocked if it's right there. Would not be shocked. Which would make it significantly weaker. But even the mainstream scientific opinion right now for this community is that this is going to be a slightly weaker, because they don't want to be too alarmist about what this potentially could mean. Solar cycle 25. So in other words, all these scientists, these solar physics scientists, and even NASA, who have predicted this cycle to be another weak cycle. Now, if it does go out of control and kickstarts it, and they're concerned, the closer to 10 years, the more activity you get from solar cycle 25. We could see things skyrocket to here. But does that mean solar cycle 26 drops even lower? Because remember, that's when everyone thinks the heart, the meat and potatoes of the grand solar minimum is really going to get going, is closer to the 2028 and beyond. This will be interesting. So here's my take. Now that we know that the Terminator event is basically just an indicator, like the super grand solar minimum. Remember, Dr. Valentina Zarkova discovered a cycle, a 2,000-year cycle that had 5 grand cycles within it. And the grand cycles were anywhere from 350 years to 415 years. The first grand cycle of this current super grand solar minimum was the Maunder minimum. Now, if you date from there to where we are now, we are due for our second of 5 grand solar minimums, or the grand cycle, I should say, here in this super grand solar minimum. So you see, the super grand solar minimum was just a term that was an identifier of where we are in this massive cycle, because there's tons more than just 2,000-year cycles. But Zarkova discovered this super grand solar minimum cycle of a 2,000-year embedded with 350 to 415-year grand cycles. And there's 5 of those. This current grand solar minimum that we are in now, or beginning right now, will be the beginning of the second grand cycle. So that means you and I will not be alive when the next super grand solar minimum starts. But again, that doesn't mean that it's going to be the strongest of the strongest. It's just telling you that another 2,000 year solar cycle has begun. And that's basically what super grand solar minimum is. Same thing here with the Terminator event. This is all magnetism. This is not antimatter. This is not going to be an explosion. This is not going to throw and hurl X-class flares at Earth and cause things to burn up and kill the grid. That's not what the Terminator... In fact, the data that these scientists used was based off of 270 years of data that they had. So they have found these Terminator events in a span between 10 and 15 years. They have tested it and correlated that when years that the termination event was 10 years apart, the closer to 10 years apart, like a little bit over or below, then you have a stronger current solar cycle moving forward. After the termination event, bam, it goes. According to Scott McIntosh, okay, this is just one scientist's theory. One. And we've got tons of other scientists who don't think this, and there might be some that agree with us. But again, this is just putting it out there and showing you folks what this guy thinks and what this all means. Now, I can tell you right now that this current cycle has already started off weak, in my opinion. If the termination event does happen quicker, closer to 10 years, and the solar cycle 25 does not jumpstart, it doesn't mean Scott McIntosh is a liar. It just means we have to go back and do more studies and more tests. Part of the problem, though, is that too many people don't take the time to actually sit down and try to digest what these events mean, what these terms mean, because termination event in your title and talking about the end of the world is more, how should we say this? It paints the picture for you to get more people to click on your video. All right. What we should be doing is educating folks and explaining to people. That way they know that this is something, a termination event, that has nothing to do with the potential of end of the world science. Now, I have heard so many theories out there. In fact, there is one person who actually thinks that Scott McIntosh is right, which is very, very weird because this person has been trying to educate about grand solar minimum for a while now, but apparently he might be changing his tune. I don't know. Maybe he's getting bored. Another perspective of this is, this one's my favorite, that Planet X is causing these Terminator events. And that all of this happening with the sun right now, with the solar cycles, has to do with Planet X being right next to the sun. And it's funny because, remember, Planet X has been next to the sun for at least 5 years now. So I thought this thing was supposed to whip around and head out to the solar system. Nope. It's still there, folks. Supposedly. It's still by the sun. It's still right there and does a 28-day orbit now, apparently. So again, so many ridiculous theories out there, and that particular theory is not even tested. There's no research to support that. There's no peer-reviewed paper. There's no mathematics that prove that there is a planet that is orbiting the sun and causing the sun to have Terminator events because of how close to the approach of Planet X. Just ridiculous stuff. If you're going to throw that out there, then let's see the calculations, let's see the math, let's see the work from a real solar physicist who has a PhD in mathematics. It would help. It would help. I'm not claiming any of this. I'm reporting it. So I don't have to put out a paper or prove my credentials. I simply report on the information. And I'm letting you guys know that the termination event, guys, they happen every 10 to 15 years. We don't even know it's happening. We don't know. It has nothing to do with the term sounds scarier than what the actual event does. All this term means is a marker. It's indicating when a cycle, basically it is indicating the strength of the upcoming cycle that we are in. So again, close to 10 years, then that would kick the solar cycle 25 in a high gear. If we see this termination event soon, that's what could happen. But if we see it closer to 15 years, it also could mean an extremely weak solar cycle. And folks, since we already know that the grand solar minimum has been confirmed by several scientists, and one being Dr. Zarkova, and we know that the worst of the worst is still on the way. The lowest solar activity is to come in 26 and 27 before we start to see things get back to a weird normal, which would be closer to solar cycle 24 by solar cycle 27 and 28. So as slow as we go to the bottom, slow we go to the top as well. That's how the sun works. This graph indicates that pretty much. We see the trends, the even flow of high solar activity and low solar activity. High solar activity, low. Again, looking at this graph, I would say that we are getting ready to head to a lull of period of low solar activity before it goes back up again. That's what this indicates. And that would line up with the next grand cycle of the super grand solar minimum. I hope I didn't confuse you even more. I know that's a lot to take in. But again, the Terminator event is just a term to indicate whether or not the strength of the cycle. That's it. Whether it's going to be strong, whether it's going to be weak. That's it. Nothing else. Has nothing to do with anything with Planet X, or has nothing to do with being the reason why Earth ends because of a Carrington event. Folks, you got to remember something. The sun's magnetic field is weakening, which means the Earth's magnetic field weakens as well. So if the sun's magnetic field is weakening, yes, that means more dangerous flares and stuff like that can leave the sun and be hurled our direction. But you have to have more. The strength of the sun has to be a little bit strong to be able to produce said X flare, like a Carrington event type event. So just as much as we have a weak magnetosphere, just remember we have a weak sun. And we are showing you that solar activity is trending low right now. It will be possible to see a record-breaking X-class flare. Yes, that would be devastating because our magnetosphere is weakening. In fact, some are predicting anywhere from 35 to 65% weaker by 2035. The maximum 65% weaker magnetic field, the minimum 35%. We're still dealing with weak magnetosphere, and that's a lot right now. So I can't imagine it being 35% weaker. Can you? Because of this right here, major summer storm hits Greece with a month's worth of rain in just 40 minutes. This happened to us here in Glens Falls. By the way, Weather Nation used our footage that I reported on the other day. But so what does that have to do with what I was just talking about with weak magnetosphere and more cosmic rays and highly charged particles in the atmosphere? Stuff like this. A month's worth of rain in just 40 minutes. That's about what we had here in Glens Falls the other day. And of course they had the hail to go with it. So our storm was nothing compared to what happened here in Spain. I cannot find the totals of how much fell. I guess I could go do the research and show you what they get there in a month. But 40 minutes. This is how they had to clear the streets. Absolute mess. And then on top of that, you get a month's worth of rain in just 40 seconds. Or 40 minutes, I'm sorry. That has everything to do with cosmic rays, folks. Our atmosphere is fluxed. When you get a month's worth of rain in 40 minutes, That has nothing to do with climate change or man-made global warming or anything like that. Nothing. And you say, well, Jake, what do you mean? Why does that happen? What do you mean? Climate change, global warming. How's that possible? What do you mean? Well, here, I'll tell you. Here's the science. Here's the science. Ready? Cosmic radiation, a.k.a. highly charged particles, act almost like magnets to other particulates in the atmosphere and water vapor. When we have an abundance of cosmic radiation in the atmosphere, boy, does that really build up the water vapor into huge water droplets. I mean, again, picture these highly charged particles as magnets. And they're the magnet, and what is attracted to these highly charged particles is water vapor. So just think about that. So maybe we're talking about one vapor droplet to maybe 10 instead of just 1. 10 times the size of the raindrop because of how much. It just depends on how much cosmic radiation that we have in the atmosphere. Nonetheless, we are fluxed. When you see this much rain falling in this quick of a time, not just in here locally in your own backyard, we are fluxed. In fact, this morning around 5:30, we had a thunderstorm, 63 degrees outside, so much lightning and thunder. And Mari was like, well, we didn't have the heat. What caused all the lightning and the thunder? Well, I'll tell you what caused all the lightning: the abundance of highly charged particles in our atmosphere. And just watching the storm this morning from my room, the curtains were closed, and the way the lightning was flashing, this, to me, was evidence of the presence of highly charged particles in our atmosphere, and it was kick-firing this morning, for sure. Again, we probably got another inch of rain this morning in a quick downpour that lasted about 40 minutes. 2 days ago, we had well over 2 inches of rain. Flooding like you wouldn't believe. It was insane. The indoor plumbing, toilets were spouting off like volcanoes from the sewer lines backing up from outside. So in the last 4 days, we've seen heavy downpour rains here in upstate New York. Once early this morning, another storm came this afternoon. I'd say we got about an inch and a half today just from the 2 storms. And then the quick 2 inches that we got the other day in about 25 to 35 minutes. So what causes all this rain? Well, when you have as much highly charged particles in the atmosphere, remember they're magnets for water vapor, and they create bigger... It's like this. Cosmic radiation is steroids for water vapor. All right? And they're juicing up big time. All right, these cosmic rays are the best kind of juice you can buy in the market. And they're going to make you real big. That's what it does to the water vapor. And that's why we're seeing these month worth of rain in just 40 minutes. And then you got in Mumbai soaked by 6 months worth of rain in 5 days. Now this was from June 8th through June 12th. So again, the story I just showed you before, June 11th. It's not just something regionally, folks. It's happening all over the U.S. And again, June 12th, that's the same date that we had the flooding rain shower here in upstate New York. So the 11th and the 12th, we are fluxed. We have tons of cosmic radiation in the atmosphere. Highly charged particles are just seeding the atmosphere all over, not just here regionally, but all over the world. To be fair, India's rain is probably not that high. So when you say, oh my God, again, 6 months total of rain, I don't care. 28 inches of rain was registered from June 8th to June 12th. 5 inches of rain is the monthly average. And 6 months fell in 5 days. Now, the all-time record is 43.6 inches. So this is an area that can see this. What year was this, by the way? and it was 2015. You're like, well, hold on, wait a minute. 2015 was at solar minimum. We were coming out of a max. That's right, we were coming out of a max. The sun was starting to decrease in its activity. The sun's strength was starting to decrease. The magnetic connection to Earth was starting to decrease. The magnetosphere here on Earth started to decrease. That's where we started to see the first wave of highly charged particles entering our atmosphere. So, guys, that's the science behind these rain bomb storms. Highly charged particles interacting with current particles in our atmosphere and CO2. Or CO2. Yeah, no, I don't think so. But I do have a video I want to show you about that where a climate scientist who was actually working for Obama is very skeptic about how climate change is being advertised today. Very interesting stuff. Smartphones are going to be used to identify space weather now. They're finding that the GPS in the smartphones on some of the stuff is actually being messed with during geomagnetic storms. So this guy here did a study and took a lot of data from some of these older phones, the iPhone 6s, Galaxy 9, the Note, a couple other Android phones. But what he's trying to do, he's trying to collect enough evidence to where he can prove that right now it looks like that smartphones are detecting geomagnetic activity with their deviations on their GPSs. So he's looking at all that data and formulating it. And this will be interesting because I'm sure this study will continue throughout the years to come. But again, just another little leak of science that's being put out there that's saying, okay, so the sun influences this, and this. Guys, they're slowly disclosing just how much the sun does impact our planet. Not just climate either. So they're acknowledging space weather and its effects on satellites and maps, GPS. We already have people out there like Heinrich Svenmark that have studied the effects of cosmic radiation and cloud nucleation. Those studies continue to improve and grow even bigger than what they were originally. Just last week, we finally got a confirmation that Aurora Boreal comes from solar wind. Well, duh. Yeah, we knew that. I always wondered why they were like surprised. I can't believe we're seeing Aurora Boreals and it's a minimum. Well, yeah, when you get solar wind bombarding the poles here, I mean that's what happens, right? I don't know. I guess for me it's this type of science, solar cycles, all this stuff, space weather. This just makes sense. This makes sense. This clicks. And I enjoy reporting it, and I enjoy putting the correlations together and hopefully I'm helping folks out there put one and one together. That's not what I wanted there. Cool, dry air to follow stormy path. Yeah, so much cooler temperatures. Look at these rainfalls here. Sunday on the 13th. This was an addition to what we already had on Friday, June 12th. Some of these areas here are getting almost 2 more inches of rain. Severe thunderstorms through Monday night. That threat is definitely over. But flooding, downpours, hails, we definitely saw the flooding, the downpours today, but these storms have moved out. Much cooler air is right behind it. For Tuesday, still a chance for rain for most of western New York, Pittsburgh, and just plain out cool breezes through Detroit into Ohio, Columbus, Dayton, Wheeling, West Virginia. Much cooler air moving into this region. By Wednesday, we're talking about 5 to 10 degrees below normal. Buffalo, Detroit, definitely expect the coolest of the temperatures, the further inland you are from the body of waters, obviously. And then, of course, the edge here like Boston, not quite looking at such cool weather like we are here around the Great Lakes and the Northeast. Mainly New York, North Country, and Western New York, as well as Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Michigan. Indiana, Kentucky. I mean, this is quite the cool off here for this time of the year, folks. I mean, come on. And here's that little clip I wanted to show you of the climate scientist. For this guy worked for Obama. So you know Barack Obama came out in 2015 and told us that climate change is the #1 threat to the world country. Here is more evidence that they are starting to, the skeptics are coming out of the woodwork. Listen up.
Global warming, which doesn't exist. So they're now going to solve climate change. But Barack Obama's chief scientist, Under Secretary for Science in 2009 from New York University, this is why world leaders, including Boris Johnson, to his unending discredit, are sucking up to this left-wing nonsense of Biden for net zero carbon dioxide by 2050. Biden called it the existential crisis of our times. He said the science is undeniable. Well, Barack Obama's former chief scientist has said in his recent book, Unsettled, and I quote, "Leaders talk about existential threat, climate emergency, disaster, crisis, but in fact, when you actually read the literature, there is no support for that kind of history."
So this guy is coming out and saying that there is no literature, no papers out there that support the climate emergency, the disaster, the crisis. There's nothing out there that supports this kind of hysteria. Now, this is an Obama scientist.
The science is insufficient to make useful projections about how the climate will change in coming decades, much less what effect human beings will have on it. Well, I've been telling you this for some time, and he said, despite a self-declared Democrat, he is, quote, increasingly dismayed by climate alarmism.
I want to point something out here. This guy is a Democrat, and he is speaking against his colleagues when it comes to climate change. He is not the same voice as the majority of the Democrats. He's saying that this information here is not sufficient to blame man for climate change. That the fossil fuel burning does have an impact, but it's a much, much, much tinier impact and a lot more complex than what the so-called mainstream scientists are telling you. So this guy is a hardcore Democrat, but he shares the same views that me and you all share about solar cycles and climate change. He acknowledges that these slight increases that man has brought, which a lot of us don't believe man's influenced climate at all. Let's give them 0.5%. Okay, let's give them that. That's probably what it is anyway, but I'm just saying. The backdrop, and he said this, not me, is the natural climate change that's occurring.
Unquote. He said, yes, the planet has warmed and the burning of fossil fuels is partly to blame, but he said the impact is, and I quote, tiny, complex and uncertain, and occurs against a backdrop of natural climate change over thousands of years that dwarfs the recent increases in temperature.
Do you see that? That there is climate change over thousands of years that dwarfs recent temperatures. That's right. We just talked about last week about an article from NPR where they basically debunked themselves about man-made global warming because they were talking about all the record CO2 in the atmosphere. And so they get on here, NPR, and they go, we found a study that shows that 4.5 million years ago that our CO2 was higher than what it is now. And also that was 7 degrees warmer too. Well, go figure. So man wasn't around to burn fossil fuels, and we were hotter 4.5 million years ago. And then you got people like, well, how do you think that we just skyrocketed all of a sudden when we added all these people? You don't think man has something to do with it? I just think we're alive for a certain part of a cycle, and we're just alive for it. Think about it for a minute. Why else would the human population thrive if the planet was suddenly warming? Maybe it's part of a natural cycle that the planet does, a cleansing of adding life and decreasing life. Right now, it feels like life is trying to be reduced when you factor in viruses and cold weather and crop loss that could lead to famine. You could look at grand solar minimum as like an equalizer, a way to level the playing field, so to speak, just depending on how bad this grand solar minimum is. But anyway, I thought it was interesting to point this out because this guy is a Democrat, and he believes that climate change is being overblown and that man is barely responsible for any of it. It's the amount we're responsible for is tiny and complex and uncertain.
He repeats, the science isn't settled.
The science isn't settled. This is a Democrat, folks. I'm emphasizing that because every time we talk about Democrats, everybody turns their nose up. Oh, he loves climate change taxes and everything. He must be this and that. No, look at that. You can be an opposite party and have similar views. Okay? Climate science should never be politicized because both sides right now don't know what they're talking about. Trump has had several attempts. He's had several attempts to explain to the world that climate change is natural and it happens in cycles, but not once has he ever done it. He just talks about how much money America would waste in the Paris Treaty climate. It's true. We would waste millions, billions of dollars. But still, if you are going to attack the so-called mainstream science, you have to give solid information. You have to be firm on why, not just this rhetoric of how much it's going to cost. None of the congressmen or senators on the Republican side even know. They don't talk about solar cycles. They've had people to talk to them about grand solar minimum. They've been briefed. They just choose to ignore it because you know what, folks? It's too inconvenient. There's too much research. There's too much reading. It's too complicated. Give me the one where it's like a Denny's coloring book menu. That's the one I can understand. And that's what Al Gore and Bill Nye and Greta are feeding you. They're giving you a Denny's coloring book menu to color and say it's climate change and it's all your fault. But senators and congressmen have had people like Patrick Moore and Mark Morano do testimonies about climate change, and they've told them it's natural. Ocean cycles. Solar cycles. Everything is natural. Everything happens, and it's happened before. And the fact that NPR is saying that climate change has happened before, 4.5 million years ago, we were 7 degrees warmer. Well, how's that possible? They're trying to tell you that man is causing this to be a warm hothouse. But yet it was hotter 4.5 million years ago. Now, can I sit here and tell you that there wasn't man on the planet 4.5 million years ago? Can any of us really be sure that 4.5 million years ago there wasn't some kind of civilization here? How do we know this planet hasn't had end of the world events many times? We weren't alive. We don't know anybody that's been alive. I know I'm getting way too deep right now, but the point I'm trying to make is that the science is not settled. And when you hear that being echoed from a person who is a Democrat, let's stop giving people grief because of their political views. Because there are people on the Republican side who don't believe in man-made global warming, but really don't agree with everything the Republican Party has to offer right now. And then there are people who are Democrats who believe in natural climate change, but don't necessarily agree with all the alarmism that's going on in the Democratic Party about this man-made climate change. It's impressive to see, to me, that someone, a former Obama official, would actually come out and admit that we are dealing with information that is not sufficient to make the prediction for climate change and how it will affect this planet in the future. Point blank. Anyway, let's take a quick look at windy.com and see what kind of action we have tonight. So far, I'll refresh this bad boy. We have seen storms across upstate New York. Let's go ahead and zoom in there first because that's where I live, and that's what matters to me right now. So, just kidding. Storms moving across the region right now as we speak, just north of where we are. Thankfully, we get no more rain. We're going to get a break. If you live south of Albany, it looks like you're going to get some rain as well. Border of Connecticut, we'll see some showers and storms. Also, for the Berkshires of Massachusetts, we'll also see some rain showers here in the next, between now and 9:30, I believe. So let's move on here. Let's check out the West Virginia area, Weston, on into parts of Frederick, Romney, West Virginia. Be on the lookout for some heavy rain and thunderstorms on the way here soon. Other than that, it's pretty quiet, guys. Some rain in the northeastern sections. Got some storms here in South Carolina. Let's go ahead and take a quick look. Got some lightning action over here. And that little cell right there is producing quite a bit of lightning. Let's kind of zoom in and see if we can get some cities here. Winnsboro. Lots of lightning action with that. Just a small little powerful storm cell here. It looks like it's going to be passing through soon. We go along the south here, parts of Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi with scattered severe thunderstorms. Nothing too crazy though. Let's check out the Gulf because there is some action to speak of right now. Nothing crazy, but we are looking at an area of interest. This shows a 70% chance of formation of a cyclone within the next 5 days. Formation for the next 48 hours is low, but for the next 5 days, this is a slow-moving system, and they are predicting this thing will gain a lot of strength as it continues to trek north towards the border of Louisiana and Texas. So Beaumont, watch out. It's heading right for you guys. Let's hope it stays off land. Let's hope it let's hope that this storm dies down and doesn't follow this, but this could be our first storm to impact. This is the second one here. It's a tropical depression, and it's moving really, guys, nowhere to be worried about here. This one particular is going to continue to move off to the northeast. But this one we're going to watch. This could be the first landfall storm of 2021. We will keep our eyes on that. Let's take a look at the GFS outlook. It will show up on this outlook here. Here we are on June 17th. Very disorganized in the Gulf. It's in the middle of your screen down here in the Gulf. And this thing is really shifting over to the east on the latest runs. So it looks unfortunate, but New Orleans could be on the northeastern part of this storm, which is usually the stronger side of these storms. Now this is a few days out. This is Friday, June 18th. But Mississippi, Jackson, Mississippi, be on the lookout. Hattiesburg, Mississippi, and Alabama definitely look like to be the main recipients of this first potential storm. We don't know if it's going to be a hurricane yet. It's still too far out to determine. They're not expecting it to strengthen up anytime soon. But check out the rain that's moving through again through the Ohio Valley into the northeast, keeping things temperature-wise a little cooler. Lots of rain to talk about in the southeast. Another low-pressure system across the Great Plains into the Great Lakes. More storms from New York all the way down to Arkansas as another low-pressure system, high pressure behind that, will filter in cooler air once again. And this is just a rainy pattern for the next several days up and down the East Coast, from the southeast all the way to the northeast, into the northern plains. Guys, yep, that's still snow. The upper elevations of Idaho are calling for some snow showers on June 24th into Montana. This is 2 Fridays from now. Pretty big system setting up over across the United States that will move across once again through the Ohio Valley, Great Lakes, and into the northeast. More heavy rain and strong storms possible for the northeast again before another system, you got it, moving across the Great Lakes, the northern plains states as well, and into the northeast. This almost sounds like a nursery rhyme of some sort, but that is the pattern that we're looking at. Stormy, rainy across the south, southeast, up the east coast, through the Midwest, Ohio, Kentucky, Tennessee. We're just going to keep seeing the atmosphere reload and continue to fire off these low-pressure systems and these heavy rain events. Now, let's talk about temperatures. With all that rain in the northeast, that's going to be kind of hard to see temperatures warming up. And you can see right here on this map that temperatures are, in fact, showing us the result of all this rain. Everybody else is in the 80s and 90s, And then we get up here where we've had a lot of rainfall. It has kept the ground saturated and a lot cooler than, say, other areas. Tomorrow is 73 degrees in the capital region of New York, 56 in Syracuse. But that's all that rain we've had. Staying cool in the Northeast. Even in parts of Ohio, 69 degrees in Akron, 69 degrees in Lima, Ohio, 68 for a high in Cincinnati, 71 in upper. So it's going to be warmer in the upper peninsula of Michigan than it will be in Cincinnati. Some bizarre weather. Welcome to the Grand Solar Minimum. Still scorchers across the Southwest. Very, 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 very hot. Hotter also in the central part of the United States, across Oklahoma, parts of Kansas, central Kansas. And watch out, Matt, you guys are starting to see some extreme heat move up your way. But temperatures still remain pretty relatively cool for the northern plains and the Northeast because of all the rain they continue to see. There is a pattern. And also, we warm up when the days are drier and cool down when we get the heavy rain events. Still, for the most part, the Great Lakes and the Northeast are staying in the low 70s. Finally, we see some heat expanding to the East Coast, but it's only short-lived for one day. Look at that. 67 in Albany on June 22nd. June 21st, it'll be 84. It's like that all across the northern plain states and the Great Lakes regions as well. Temperature is hot enough 1 minute, dramatic cool down the next. 72 degrees in June 23rd in Cincinnati, Ohio is beautiful and gorgeous and unheard of. Very cool for the Ohio area, for the Northeast, for the Great Lakes, northern plain states, the areas that I've kind of said, hey, we're going to see cooler temperature there this summer. A little quick warm-up once again, 26, but then more rain across the area will push those temperatures back in the 60s and 70s. Look at that. All that heat being isolated to the south, the Northeast and Great Lakes, northern plains, still 60s and 70s. That's about it. 3 days in the 16-day forecast for the Northeast I've seen in the 80s. 3 possible dates. So we are below average. Temperatures are struggling to get back up to summer-like here by the end of this month, June 30th. So maybe we have a shot at seeing some real summer heat by July 1st. But we are watching the heat waves out in the Southwest. We are watching the multiple heat waves that are going to be affecting the central plain states of the United States. Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska. Again, Matt, looks like your heat chances are going to go up as we continue through June. And then along the East Coast, the Carolinas, Virginia, Georgia, Florida, should be this hot this time of year. Nothing really nothing unusual really happening right now. It's summer in these states here in the South and the East Coast. All right, let's take a look at some of our ocean temperature data. North Atlantic continues to maintain below baseline. It went up a little bit. It's dropped a little bit. It's trying to maintain. Right now, it's currently about 0.216 below baseline. And El Nino has been on the rise lately, but did see also a drop the same time the North Atlantic dropped. It is also holding steady about 1.199 above baseline. So neutral, we need 0.5 to get into above baseline to get into El Nino, and negative 0.5 to get into La Nina. Guys, I want to say hello to a few people out there watching the broadcast. Our faithful folks like Very Enthusiastic Gardener, Pete, good to see you out there as well. Knife Collector, I saw Richard Davidson earlier out there. Geo85, always a pleasure to have you here. Lots of new faces. Ian, good to see you. Ian asked, what's the prediction for hurricanes? I don't know. That's not my pay grade right there. I report. I don't really want to even name it because I'll tell you something right now. It could be a quiet year. Could be a quiet year. And then it could be crazy. Who knows? But we'll see. I'll report them, though. I'll tell you that much. From what I've heard on hurricanes, I've heard not much different from last year. So take that for a grain of salt. But hello to lots of familiar faces out there. Thank you for tuning in. We did have a donation out here, and I'm trying to scroll back through the chat, and I want to thank that person. I didn't get to it quick enough. I was in the middle of my Terminator event rant. There it is. Geo85 says, I'm too drunk. God bless. Well, God bless you as well, and thank you very much for the donation. Very interesting. Matt Bros was in the house as well. So, Cass, good to see you in our chat as well. Jerome from Rochester, fellow New Yorker, All the Sun. Good to see you as well, folks. Be sure to check our Teespring store. If you like t-shirts, hoodies, or if you're wearing masks, we have those too. We have bumper stickers. Check out if you like the CO2 t-shirts, stuff like that. Go to our Teespring store. It is, if you're on your PC or computer, or I'm sorry, your PC or your Mac, go to our YouTube channel and you will see the Teespring store link right there. Join us at YouTube as a paid member. Look at it as a tip jar for us, a reoccurring tip of $2. Don't want to swing the $2? That's fine. Head on over to Patreon. Become a $1 member over there as well. Guys, every little bit helps. We are subscriber supported, and we do appreciate every little bit that we do. And again, guys, we're getting closer and closer to getting a more normal-like schedule. I'm hoping to be able to do a show tomorrow, hoping. So if not tomorrow, definitely Wednesday. We'll get a crop report in. But we are definitely getting a lot closer to seeing more broadcasts, more reports on the grand solar minimum. And, you know, guys, if you hear some crazy outlandish stuff, come our way. We'll help you decide for yourself. I'm not going to give you the answer and tell you what to think, but I'll provide the scientific evidence that shows you that it is or isn't anything to worry about. So with that being said, thank you guys for tuning in once again to the Grand Solar Minimum channel. Everyone be safe out there, and we will talk soon.
Do you like this show? Give us a thumbs up. Want to support us more? Share to your favorite social media platform. Buy a t-shirt or become a Patreon. All links are in the description below.